Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Off Angle. We are in with another episode, continuing to get them out, of course. No four-man this time. We tested the water with it. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe it won't. You'll have to obviously subscribe and keep track and all that good stuff. Everything, I'll keep reiterating this for a couple episodes as well, because there are a few people that asked. Everything is slowly but surely getting added to the Anchor and the Spotify. I have to go back and re-record the episodes because obviously I didn't save the previous ones, which I guess was not smart of me for now the workflow of going back. But nonetheless, it is myself and Pronogo once again joined by Yumi down below on the bottom there. And yes, a stalwart of the podcast, I suppose, at this point, which I guess that's my first thank you, is you continuing to come on. We must be doing something right.
Well, I mean, you keep asking, I'll keep coming. I think we've got enough rapport with each other that it's like we're all comfortable with each other. I never feel like I'm the odd man out here. You guys might have a little host and co-host thing going on, but I feel like I'm part of the conversation, so that's all new.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. And I mean, there was that period of time during the summer, right, where you have the player break going on and everybody starts up a podcast and whatnot, and some do not survive the post-player break. Maybe people get a bit too concerned with viewership or direction or whatever, and thankfully we started in a way where we didn't really have much of that. So now we're maybe starting to find it into 2023. And yeah, just before I kind of go into the first topic, really, another thank you to all the viewers who keep coming back. I know that YouTube doesn't like it when you take a break, but we got some good viewership on the last one, and hopefully this year for those sort of viewers and whatnot, we'll maybe add a bit more structure in, maybe endeavor. I'd love to get a producer and throw some stuff together, and all the things we talk about get thrown on the screen, but those things tend to cost money, so we'll see about that. Maybe we can work around our workflow. I know that I do have a stream deck. It'd be nice to put it to use. So maybe if I get familiar with that. Nonetheless, let's kick into the show here, folks. We are going to open up by talking about the Katowice Play-ins. It's sort of the most recent results that we can work with. We are recording on the first day of Kato, so there's probably going to be a little bit of setup on how we see teams doing, with a bit of reference to how some of the favorites are currently doing at the moment, because it's actually been a very good opening day for them. But to break into the play-ins, of course, I would say there were actually a number of surprises in this one, to be perfectly honest with you. We thought that play-ins were cut and dry, but the sore thumb that sticks out is Furia. Ence is not too far behind them. And a couple others as well that I think maybe people had expected to do a bit better, maybe like Pain to place a bit higher than they didn't really show very much. Meanwhile, we have IHC qualifying, we have Fnatic just kind of squeaking through, which again are maybe some surprising names at this point. But I like the look of the play-ins. I like the look of the double elimination bracket. There's a lot to unpack here, guys, but I think we should probably start with the disappointments. We'll talk about the sad stuff first. And yeah, that biggest one that sticks out to me is going to be Furia. So what are the thoughts on Furia? Really, really disappointing here in this play-in.
It was weird that they allowed themselves to get roped into that Asian CS style. IHC really ran them through the loop. I saw a few rounds, obviously, just making the waves, right? And people were reacting like, "Oh, these rounds are insane! Like, what's going on?" If you missed that matchup, especially I'm thinking on Mirage, like some of the rounds that were happening were just absolutely insane, and back and forth. And to close it out on Anubis was really nice. Obviously, I like to see new maps get play. We talked a lot about that map when it was first added on this show, so a bit of a callback, but the main thing that I would take away from that series is that, like, if you aren't actually prepared for IHC, which I think Furia just decided to look past them and thought, oh yeah, who else are we going to face? We're already basically in. It's an Asian CS team. Who's going to bother? I feel like maybe they just allowed that hubris to hit them, which is a tale as old as time. That's how upsets are made usually. But I know Yumi probably has a little bit more familiarity with IHC. So what do you got for us? What do you think?
They're a weird team because I think people need to understand that they're not even. I think there's an argument to be made that they're not even the best team within the Asia region, because domestically they place second at a lot of events. I think they've had decent runs in previous tournaments, but they are probably the most consistent in terms of getting to like a finals, but not actually winning it. And usually the players that will sometimes go missing, Score, Annihilation, they don't have the same level of impact as they do earlier in tournaments, even domestically sometimes. And for that to not really be the case here in the play-ins, where both of those players as stars have really shown up, I think they hit Furia with such a good baseline with the sort of individual playmaking that those two guys can offer, that it was actually like there were many rounds in that game where Furia probably should have won. You know, numerically they had like advantages. They gave a lot of respect actually to some of these IHC players, but they were just that on fire that they were winning rounds that they shouldn't have, and a lot of that was actually just annihilation. Not even always ulping. You know, was actually just like beaming people with the rifle, which is, you know, it's not something totally out of his character, but he was winning the clutches quite smart. Like he was playing the clutches very intelligently, which is actually sort of out of his character, out of what people knew him from the Asia region, because he was just like a repeat, I don't give a fuck kind of AWPer. He just always took fights and he'd get out of it because he was just that mechanically better than the other players. And that's not something that you can say in that Furia game. He's not mechanically better than a lot of these players, but he outplayed them in a lot of instances, probably because Furia underestimated them.
Yeah, I think there is kind of like a big energy around that, especially with the Asian teams at the moment. I don't know, though, because I feel like Furia have been on this downward trajectory for a while. If we didn't have the major in Rio, then I think perhaps, you know, they wouldn't have had kind of home crowd advantage, especially there, is really going to help you out, right? Might be an overplayed kind of line, but I do feel that this team at one point was, you know, this super aggressive, super unpredictable kind of squad, and now you have a couple squads that are better at that. Maybe Spirit is one that springs to mind at the moment, currently playing. You know, and I think that they maybe as this roster, their time is sort of up. At the same time, we have Queserato and Yuri making top 20. So pretty kind of surprising stuff that they have these individual pieces. And maybe again, as we've talked about a great deal, as we might go on to touch, the IGL sort of starve that seems to be going on in a lot of the top teams at the moment, and I think that Art is maybe just starting to cost them more than he gains. At the same time, to hit a positive note that maybe we could focus on a little bit more here, IHC obviously coming from the Asian region, I think that individually the Asian region is at a level that can compete, and we've, you know, kind of seen that here. We'll see what happens. They maybe have kind of the look of the draw against a Liquid as well later on today, which would be, you know, a matchup again you wouldn't expect them to win, but there is good potential that they can. Nonetheless, I think that, you know, the Asian region, we maybe have to look towards it now. The individual skill is there. These teams just need to start coming together cleanly. And also sticking together. There's a lot of roster moves that just happened so very abruptly over there. So I feel like the region itself is now starting to prove itself as not a top contender. Obviously, you don't want to go that far, but certainly making bigger marks than they ever were in the international events.
I think what's interesting is that this is probably a bigger indictment of the fact that Art as an in-game leader has certainly had his ups and downs in terms of his individual performance, as well as what type of a structure and style this Furia team brings, because they captured people with the hyper aggression, the I don't care if we're going to lose our entry, we'll win it 4v5 kind of mentality, to now actually sort of adopting more sort of structured pack-based play, which is fine. That works, provided the roles are sort of ironed out, which it feels like they have been. Like, Drop has been playing well, Safe has been playing much better, Queserato and Yuri, top-level riflers. This should actually be Art's time to show us what kind of strats and nefarious acts that he can get up to individually alongside that team structure. But it actually felt like in this, especially in this IHC game, they just refused to adapt. They refused to change what they had sort of set up, especially on that CT side, where they were just they got pounded on the B bomb site on Anubis so many times over, and they refused to make an adaptation. They refused to change it. And this has to be a black mark on Art as an in-game leader if he's unable to make an adaptation against a team that is arguably weaker or has less sort of proven results at international level competitions. Furia were expected to make it to playoffs in Katowice. Not even making it into the group stage is a massive black mark, and I think we've seen people in the community probably argue that this is probably the time that Furia need to really dig down deep and think about whether they make roster changes, because if they're going to make one, the start of the season would probably be a good place to start, so that, you know, there's maybe even that cushion where the next couple of events, maybe you give Furia a little bit of leeway. You know, they're still trying to find their form, whatever. But right now, with them probably being the best team that Brazil has to offer, this can't be how these big events go for them. They just can't afford these upsets so early on.
It's not even just the upset thing either. I think for me, like art, so Scriv touched on a point earlier that there is like this IGL starve happening. We're in a bit of a famine for certain teams, certain regions where you just aren't seeing any movement. I mean, I kind of think that it's like of any kind of player, but especially IGLs in NA, in Brazil, in I would even argue in some of the lower echelons of, I mean, maybe the French scene is like past its prime or whatever, but like who's IGLing at this point, right? You know, Apex is like a spot where we keep pointing to as like, hey, this guy probably isn't, you know, maybe doing everything that he should be doing with these pieces. It looked a little bit better today, obviously. We'll hold some caution to that since it's the start of the season still. But, you know, like that was a pain point at the end of last year, right? And obviously he's not on a French majority team, but the point is like there's a lot of scenes in a lot of regions that seem to have this problem where they can't actually elevate IGLs up. And I think at this point, like if Art isn't going to continuously reinvent his style, isn't going to continuously try to find a way to like use what are obviously his strengths in that aggressive calling, that catch you with your pants down kind of attitude, if he can't actually adapt that system, that idea, that principle into a situation where he can actually get some W's, get some round wins very early on, or at least put his team into an advantageous position where sort of like you kind of think of like the unfortunate MSL teams, like he'll call a good strat and the players won't hit their shots. Well, at least then you don't look at the IGL as the problem. You can say, okay, that was a sound strategy, could have really worked and really, you know, worked into a cohesive sort of style for the whole rest of the team that really at the end of the day was the star players that dropped the ball. But that's definitely not the case. I will also say though that, you know, you referenced Safe Yumi. I feel like even though he's been playing better, I still don't think that Art knows how to use another opper. Like, I still think that's, I mean, at the very least, Safe is not the pain Safe that we remember from, like, I think it was Stockholm or something, like way back in where he almost managed to get his team to the main event, so to speak, out of the contender stage or whatever it's called, the initial qualifications. Like that all blends together to me. But the thing that you can take away from that is like, okay, Safe still hasn't really been able to be his old self. And this is sort of like Junior on Triumph, I guess, but obviously Safe is, you know, on a higher level than that. It's kind of giving me shades of that, where it's like, this guy was the team in some respect. He was able to be so good and so such a linchpin for that team's success that when you take him up and it's like, okay, you're getting the call up, dude. Like your stats look good. Your performance passes the eye test. Why can't he work in a system where in theory they should have more potential because they have better players surrounding him, and yet he's still not really able to be anything other than a bog standard opper in this Furia team when that's not what he was in Pain. And it's not just statistically, but also in terms of playstyle, and that's where I think about how he's being utilized and where, you know, what could be done differently. So I do think Furia have a lot of homework to do, be they changing up some styles or actually swapping a player. Unfortunately, I kind of feel like it's going to be the same way that Cloud9 went, where they're not going to remove the problem piece of Art, and maybe also for good reason. Who could possibly replace him? Like, I mean, in Cloud9's case, it's not like you could get Jerry from Forza or something. Like, that's contract hell out the wazoo as far as I know. Those players are never going to get another org for the rest of their lives in CS. But, you know, like, whatever. I don't even know who you would go for. I know Maui Snake was touting Boomich. I don't know what you would be able to do for Furia. Like, I don't really see any actual rising IGL star in the Brazilian space, but I don't admittedly keep too much tabs on it. So maybe there's one that has slipped to the radar. It's just weird that, like, again, I think back to that IGL famine that's plaguing so many regions. I really I'm kind of surprised that that's happening. It's like, this is what happens when you really utterly mismanage like the lower level scene and you get into these like weird spaces where, if you guys remember, like years ago, Furia had like this news story where they had 5-year contracts or something for their players. Yeah. And I think this was back in like 2018 or something. Guys, if that was 2018, it would only be out at some point this year. That's how long it lasted. Like, actually, yes, 5 years. That's a long ass time. Obviously that was with a different roster anyway, but like that's still wild to think about. So yeah, the buyouts have been crazy in Brazilian space. I'm not really surprised that they're now sort of reaping what they've sown in that respect. I know it might sound callous, but it's kind of wild that, you know, they had as much success as they had. I don't think Furia is going to win a trophy this year, and which is kind of sad because obviously after the major you'd think maybe they were more contenders, but not in my book.
Yeah, it's just kind of wild to me as well. We have, you know, Furia who Yuri and especially Keserato are just playing lights out Counter-Strike and they can't make it work.
Yeah. I just want to make one other point real quick. I know I just talked a lot, but I have to ask YouMe, like, do you think IHC's success, you said that they might only be the second best team in the Asian CS space. I've also noticed there's a lot of Mongolian teams now. And I wonder if that majority, like Mongolian roster or whatever, where it's like they're all speaking the same language, they're all on the same page culturally, presumably, at least more so to a point where they were doing mixed teams. I remember back when like there was as Valorant was starting to take off, and or like maybe a little bit before that. Obviously, the Asian CS space completely collapsed, especially in the COVID era. And I just have to wonder, like, I remember there was a roster. I don't remember which org it was, but it was like Zine from MVP PK alongside some Chinese players and like maybe a Taiwanese player or something else. I don't remember. Like there was just a whack roster that was put together. And I also remember, I think it was, you would know this. Didn't Tai Lu have some non-Chinese players at some point or a few points as a result of that? Or was that another team? Maybe you know what I'm talking about. If not,
I'm not so familiar with whether that happened with Tai Lu, but I know for a fact that Invictus Gaming were a team that definitely explored having, like, they've had Russian players previously.
They still have them, yeah. That roster still exists, which is a wild roster for anybody.
I think Vadim is now their coach instead of being a player for them. So I don't even know how any of that works. Especially even Tai Lu have Letny as their coach, and he's been there for a while now, which is I imagine there's a certain level of communication barrier that happens, but it's probably been enough time with them that it's like they've overcome that somehow. It's like, we'll just point at the picture. This means we're doing this. Like they must have some sort of translation sheet. But it's strange because the Mongolian scene had the most amount of growth out of any region during the COVID era when everything else was blowing up. Tournaments were pulling out of the Asian scene. We were having less sort of regional conflicts. It was a very strange time, but it's cool because the Mongolian scene has always been like a powerful force within the Asia region. They've always had the talent, but the problem is that very much the same way that the sort of most grassroots scenes go, the players just chop and change so frequently. I mean, you'll look past it like a player's history, and there are a few that have maybe stuck to like one or two organizations, but most of them will have gone through the motions of like Mazalai, the Mongols, Renewal, just going between every single roster, trying to find something that works. And I think the good news for IHC is that they found something that worked quite a while ago, even with Nine, the other AllPerb that sort of, I think, most dominant within the Mongolian scene. But they sort of managed to pull Score and Annihilation out of international affairs, where their English is a little bit more refined, but they've seen another type of play style, and so they can almost implement that into the Mongolian scene in a way that's it feels natural. They almost played too aggressive, too balls to the wall, in much the same way that the Chinese division did. But the international rosters within the Southeast Asia region tried to adopt the European mentality as best they could, while still being a little bit loose. So they've sort of struck that middle ground almost by going for other ventures outside of the region, which is cool.
Yeah, it's good to see, and I think that it'll continue to be interesting here because they're going to come up against a Liquid that at the moment doesn't really look all that great. So I don't know. I'm not going to ask anyone to put money where their mouth is, so to speak, but I think there's potential for them to maybe continue upsetting, to be honest with you.
They can take a game at least. Come on, like... We look at what they're up against. I mean, I don't even remember their group off the top of my head, but I'm like there's a decent number of teams that could get upset. I mean, maybe the alternative is alarm bells sounding. Furia just got hit, with the torpedo. Like you imagine it's like, I don't know, like it's like U.S. Navy in World War II against the Japanese, and they're like, oh, they don't have anything worthwhile. Don't worry. And then it's just torpedoes start coming, kamikaze shit. What's happening? I don't know. Yeah, the alarm bells are sounding, and maybe everybody else tightens their ship up, right? You know what I mean?
They're in a group with Na'Vi, G2, and FaZe.
There's no way.
Look good. Like, there's just no way. I just, as much as I would love Asia CS to be put on the map in another way, be like, oh yeah, fucking the Mongolians are here to play. It's just that group. I don't see it happening.
They'll take a map off of Na'Vi and they will defeat Spirit. That's my prediction.
They're not even. Yeah. No.
I tried, boys. If the Mongolians watch this podcast, they'll know I tried.
Well, listen, underestimate them until they make it.
Yeah, of course.
Well, yeah, exactly.
It's exactly like it's a fun story for me to get behind, which is the only reason why I'm like sort of half jokingly putting my stock in them. But the other, I mean, like we think about the players that were on the come up, like Mao's last year, right? It's like, all right, I'm just going to continue doubting you until you prove me wrong, and eventually they did indeed prove me wrong. But like that's how it should be, really, if you're going to be honest about how like new talent talent. Like, because it does beggar belief in some ways. It's like, what are you talking about? This team can make semifinals of a major, and yeah, maybe it was the most scuffed major in recent history, but they still did it, and obviously that speaks to some success, right? So.
I think there's an important point to be made about if we're going to discount how the major played out in Rio, you know, with Heroic Outsiders as our grand final. There's also a certain amount that we have to discredit other results as well in that major, you know, whether that's Furia, whether that's Mouse, and how much success they were able to have. If everything else is in turmoil, you know, I'm not a personal subscriber to the belief that that major was completely scuffed and, you know, Outsiders probably didn't deserve to win it or something of the sort. Maybe they just struck a good timing. Either way, if you're going to sort of move with that narrative, then a lot of other results have to be discredited alongside Outsiders' success or Heroic success in that final, because if you can't simply choose, oh, well, this one team just got lucky, because then by that logic, other teams in the bracket would have also gotten lucky.
Yes, indeed. I think certainly, I don't know, man. I think I could see them beating Liquid. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that IHC, I'm in their corner a little bit.
If Annihilation plays like he has been, then yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I guess I will say Liquid have looked like the most fraudulent team recently. I know they, like, obviously they're here, but I don't know, man. I just like the fact that they lost to Big with like, what was it, a combined 10 rounds and 2 maps. I know Bigger, like, they did a hot form, but obviously they didn't do anything. They did nothing to G2 recently. So, like, I mean, that's the difference. Is Liquid is supposed to be at least as good as G2, right? Like, that's how, I mean, the org backs it with lots of money, right? There's loads of stuff going back and forth there. Obviously, they made big signings. What's up? Where's the results, right? And G2 obviously won a trophy at the end. Obviously, they were able to make short work of Liquid as well. It's like, what's going on here? Like, why is Liquid having so many struggles? And I know we already talked about it in the last episode. We don't have to linger on it here, but I just feel like, yeah, I don't expect them to do anything in this event. If that was, I mean, even if they had a better group, a group of life as opposed to a group of death, I don't think they would have gone very far. I would not have taken them to make playoffs, I think, in any group. So.
Yeah, the honeymoon period seems to be over. Maybe they will prove us wrong, but like you say, a difficult group for them at Kato. To continue on with the play-ins, we kind of get 2 birds, 1 stone there. You know, an overperformer and an underperformer. Sure. Another underperformer, I think, was Ence, which you know is one that kind of hurts a little bit. We had him on the show, Snappy, quite early on, and they were pretty confident in this team. And you know, unfortunately, it's really not come to a head. They underperform at the major as well. To be honest, you know, it's really not looking too good. He was obviously in high spirits about it. Said they would be top 5 before the end of the year. They didn't really get close to that, unfortunately. And it seems like, you know, Sun Pius is an upgrade over Hades, I would say. And I think that has been proven on the server a number of times now. But I just feel like this, you know, man, the more supportive elements to this team, right? Dihar looks pretty good and is able to just do his own thing. But the gap that, you know, Spinks has left is definitely being felt in a big way. My boy Madden's maybe not looking too hot in some of these games. He is more of the supportive element, but it really is looking a little bit weaker from basically, I think that rest of the pack that goes around Sun Pius, that goes around Dihar. Valde's also included in that he's not really, you know, the big punch that they were expecting, and they go down to complexity in the end as well. Not like it's one of the scarier teams they could have come up against in Spirit, Fnatic, Cloud9, NIP. You know, complexity is probably one, maybe let's say 4 or 5 steps up from the bottom ilk of teams, I would say. And they end up going down in relatively decisive fashion, actually. So, you know, really disappointing stuff, I think, from Ence. And again, this is a team that we have to look at, that maybe there is a change to come. It's very difficult for this team, I think. They really, you know, hit a diamond vein, or however you find diamonds, when Spinks came along, just because of how, you know, solid he was and how quickly he came up. And they've just not been able to fill the gap for me. I think it's just a shame. It is a shame, because they were sort of the fan favorite. You always expect something out of them at a tournament. You never know, they might make a sneaky little run. I think those days are over, and they're not able to pull out the checkbook, so to speak, because that's just kind of the way that the org functions. I sort of heard, you know, they're all months ago now, but a few rumors around that they were trialing quite a few players. Some of those players were too expensive to pick up. Valde, of course, was out of contract, you know, things like that. And yeah, Sunpius is there, but he doesn't quite have the punch that they maybe need to put in the backpack, so to speak.
Yeah, I think what people need to also understand is that as much as people were excited for Valde because he was exiting OG and it was going to be a new opportunity for him, he is also, I think, several years past where you need him to be in terms of his sort of star level caliber. Because you make this roster 3 years ago in sort of like peak form. I think Valde could adapt to this role perfectly. The problem that you have is that Snappy worked with Spinks for like 2+ year, or like coming up, I think, on just under 2 years, and had developed him as a player significantly. So Spinks knew what to expect from a Snappy strat. Snappy knew what to expect in terms of how Spinks wanted to play.
Yep.
And trying to go like for like with Valde just never made sense. They would have tried their best to make it work, but I almost feel as well, like after how long Valde was with OG, where he was still proactive on CT sides, but he never had to sort of hunt and lurk as proactively as Spinks had to in certain instances for Ence. It just feels as though there's like a mentality difference in terms of what Valde's expected to do for this roster. So I I'm actually not surprised that Valde is sort of underperforming. They needed to undergo some sort of culture shift, not only picking up some Pius, but also going with Valde. They needed something. They needed a different approach from Snappy, because Sampaius actually had very sort of aggressive, selfless teammates in that he didn't have to be sort of a pry bar in a lot of rounds. Now it feels like Sampaius has to be that for Ence to a certain degree. Otherwise, the team cannot close out on rounds. So it's yeah, it feels like they're just trying too hard to emulate what success they had in the start of last year around the Spinks, around Spinks as a player, and go too like for like with all the sort of new acquisitions.
Well, the other thing too is that with the Spinks Hades lineup, if Hades was on form, if he caught a heater in that moment, like he was obviously a bit of a streaky player, but if he was on form, then like he would be the pry bar just by himself, or he would hit the highlight, defensive move where he goes for the aggro peak on CT side and then falls back and does all the things. And like, that's great. And that, if it was more consistent, he'd probably still be in a top uppermost echelon team right now, instead of, I think he's on 9 now alongside maybe Snacks or something to that effect. But anyways, he's on one of the lower tier Polish teams, and maybe he'll be on the come up again. That's people remember from the Wisla Krakow days or whatever, however you pronounce that team. That's another one that he was on previously. So anyway, the main takeaway that I have from that lineup and comparing it to the current one is that exactly what Yumi said about Sampaius not really being the one who like cracks open the bomb site on T side, or does some other high impact play to get you an advantage when you really need it. That was Hades when he was streaky on form. That was also Spinks when he was just consistently getting these really crazy shots. Like, he morphed the game in a way that, like, okay, if Hades is on form, great. Like, Spinks is not even needed as much. He can just anchor somewhere, or he can be, some sort of late round linchpin to like lurk and get you the round win. But if Hades isn't on form, if he's cooled off a little bit, then obviously Snappy can recognize that, tell him to go somewhere else, tell him to hold more defensive angles, hopefully it's those shots, while Spinks can elevate his level of play. Now, Sampaius is solid enough that they don't really need to worry about the on form or not. But he's also not as explosive as an on-form Hades, and he can't really cover the same role as what Spinks did when he was consistently putting up numbers. So you didn't have a replacement for Spinks, which is pretty much what everybody was saying when this move was announced. It's like, okay, they don't have a replacement for Spinks. They have an upgrade in the op department in terms of consistency. But what they missed about that, I think, was the fact that Hades could be more explosive. Like, an on-form Hades was just a different kind of opper than what Sampaius is, even when he's consistently putting up crazy numbers, which is not a diss on Sampaius at all. Like, he's obviously an upgrade in the op. It's just that because of that nuanced factor of like, I have this really explosive guy who can take over a game, or at least take over a half or whatever if he's feeling it, and then I also have Spinks who can just, obviously he's like a world-class rifler under my tutelage. Snappy probably feels a bit aggrieved. And maybe there will even be some reunion in the future, perhaps. This does happen sometimes when, like, Spinks is obviously having difficulty over in Vitality, finding any form of consistency under a different leadership. Maybe he'll look back wistfully and think, wow, I reached, major playoffs with Snappy under Ence, and, what could I have been if I didn't sever that relationship or whatever. So, it could happen. Like what Yumi was saying, is almost 2 years together. That's going to form a pretty heavy bond that obviously still lasts to this day if the players themselves are to be believed. That is a potential move if, obviously Ence can't write the checkbook, what Scribb said earlier, but, if he decides that there's victory and greatness is worth more than the money in the short term, then he might actually go back. You never know, man. You never know.
Also, people have been kind of calling for the head of Apex for a while, so maybe it's not even he goes back. Maybe he goes forward.
Honestly, I was really hoping Snappy would just walk into G2, especially when Hookstu was on the downward slope. Really doubt that that's going to happen at this point, since they have caught a little bit of success, and obviously there was the whole tragic circumstances around the Abu Dhabi finals. But beyond that, it's like, yeah, I mean, I think I've been a big Snappy supporter. To see Ence this far down definitely gives me a little bit of pause in that department. But I do think that, you can't take away what he's already proven, especially since it was so recent. It was literally just a year ago, less than that, really. When he was still, rocking with Spinks. And if you put him with, Zywoo, I mean, I don't know, man. I think the rest of that sentence is auto-completed by ChatGPT, where they tell you how the Vitality win the next major in Paris or whatever. And it's without Aphex. But that won't happen, unfortunately. That's just a fan fiction. Would be pretty cool, though. Would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I don't know. There's I need to get on the chat GTP. I've not used it at all.
Well, so. AI will bring forth the downfall of civilization, Shriv. It's already bringing the downfall of my ability to speak the English language. So enjoy it while you can. Enjoy it while you can.
Fair enough. Yep, that's definitely a different podcast, so maybe we could start.
I guess a final point on Ence really is that I don't know if they can reclaim form. They were pretty close to Cloud9, right? Like they were pretty close to taking them, and that filled me with confidence. I was like, okay, they'll qualify in the second half of the bracket or whatever, right? When they go down to the lower bracket, and then they lost to Complexity, like what Yumi was saying. It's like, I don't know. Like I do think that Complexity, they've been, we all remember the Cologne where they were taking phase and they almost 2-0'd them. If you really look back at it, now Grim seems to be super consistent. Maybe Complexity can really surprise now that they're in the event, but. I don't know. I don't know if I can rate them above any of the teams that they're going to go up against, right? I think they're in the same group as Cloud9, if memory serves. Obviously, wait, no, that can't be true, is it? How big are these groups, if that's the case? I think they're in the group.
They're
in
the same. No, Big's in the same group as Cloud9. They're in the same group as Heroic OG, Miles, Vitality, NIP, who played today, as we're recording, and then outside is Fnatic. So only one game, I think, from that group got played today, and then the rest are getting played tomorrow. So we'll find out more
cool.
as it goes on. Yeah, pretty much. So
I think upper and lower finals are the following day. So
right. Yeah, it's all on HLTV. People know where to find it. But yeah, so they're Complexity are in a group with Heroic OG, Miles, Vitality, NIP, Outsiders, and Fnatic. I just kind of wanted to add and reiterate, I think I kind of completely agree, to be honest, that this form events has kind of gone back to where FPX were, where they were themselves, just sort of chilling, middle of the pack, maybe nick a map, maybe nick a series that, upsets it for the top tier teams, but they're not in the running to join those top tier teams and compete against them as they were in the same way last year, to be honest with you. Again, which I just think is really sad. I'm a little bit biased because I know some of the players, and they're probably the only players that I know from the upper echelons. So, you kind of want to see them do well. But the move just never really came off. They've got just new issues now, I think, and they don't rightly know what to do with them. I think they, like the rest of us, maybe felt, if they can just get the AWP a bit more consistent, then maybe the sting of Spinks leaving will be less. But it's just not been the case, to be honest. And they're unfortunately in a dire kind of situation, and maybe we'll see some big changes in the Ence camp. Complexity is a good one to talk about, though, if we want to move to our more positive light on the play-ins and whatnot.
Okay.
I would certainly say, they open close against Big in a BO1 and then do pretty well in the BO3s, to be honest. They definitely had some tension on the first map against Ence, but other than that, they had a good role. Did they get an easy draw? Probably against Permitter, who are, for my money, the worst team in the tournament. But all the same, Complexity starting to find a bit more groove with Halzerk, I think, is ultimately, they are the team that had AWPing issues out the wazoo, and they patched them up, and now all of a sudden things have, turned up rosy. The mullet madness from Halzerk is working a treat so far.
Yeah, honorary American Halzerk with his mullet. Yeah, no, it's cool. Also, just on the promoter thing, I think they were just happy to be there. Type of
Oh yeah,
Yes,
vibe.
definitely, big
That's the kind
time.
of vibe I got with this team. Kind of newer players to to higher level play, and yeah, just probably thankful for the experience. The same way that we maybe look at like an IHC, just go like, well, the more tournaments they attend, surely if they keep doing it, they'll do something eventually. So maybe one for the future. But on the opening discussion, I mean, it's just crazy what you can do without Junior. It's nice to see that Holzerk has been able to have his influence on North American Counter Strike. He pretty much dominates when they play domestically, and also is now able to translate that to a certain degree over to EU alongside either Grim or Floppy.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because when Grim isn't sort of popping off, Floppy is usually there, and that's a really good sign for this team that on the off chance that I guess your biggest star on the rifle is not going to perform, then you always have like a fail safe or a secondary activation. Because so far what we're seeing from JT and Fang is that they're providing a pretty elevated baseline compared to where they were when they were struggling with AWPing issues and unsure about where to go with the direction of this team. So yeah, no, it's a cool story to have that Complexity can sort of come back into it, because when we compare where Complexity were with like the config blame F roster, where it's like, oh, we're gonna build the Juggernaut and we're gonna do all this, they were clearly dishing out a lot more money, I think, than they've sort of landed on with this team. But if they can have results like this and make it to group stages, or even maybe even squeak through to a playoffs at some point in one of these bigger tournaments, then it sort of justifies the direction that Complexity have gone by focusing a bit more on the North American side and only slightly expanding outward.
Well, I don't know the numbers since the Halzerk move, but I'm pretty sure that like Blame F and config alone was like the price of this whole roster. So like, yeah, the numbers were really crazy back in the Juggernaut days. And, even beyond that, I think to your point, results kind of the same, like kind of similar. You know what I mean? They obviously get to cater more towards the NA crowd now with the NA predominant lineup. And yeah. I guess that does just remind me, Rip Obo. Like, I don't know what happened to that guy, but hope he's doing well.
Okay, man.
Yeah, hope he's doing well. Yeah, obviously, like one of the things that really gets me about all of these NA orgs that oftentimes don't, at least in the modern day, don't necessarily want to pick up an NA team, is like, obviously that's what Cloud9 is, right? For people who don't know. And, you kind of see this all over the place. Like Fnatic is technically UK, but they have they, for a while they were Swedish. Now they're international. It's interesting to track all of that, but it also kind of leaves me with these weird, like, I'm not even sure where to even place expectations on for some of these, because obviously if you're going international, but you're not picking the best of the best, you're probably not paying the highest of the highest salaries, which means maybe you are getting what you sort of paid for in that respect. With Complexity, I would actually say the same about Fnatic right now. And the other thing about Fnatic too is that, like, I think it was Crims giving some interviews recently, and he was like, yeah, we can beat any team. And I'm like, what? Like, wait, what does he think he's on like the old Swedish Fnatic from like 2016 and stuff? Like, what's going on here? Like, I don't know. I mean, okay, confidence is great, but like for that roster in particular, I don't know. And I would say the same about Complexity to the point of the orgs is like, I think these orgs are putting in exactly the amount of money. And again, I don't know all the numbers, but it seems to me that they're putting in the exact amount of money for what they're getting in terms of the placements. Complexity on a bit of a trend upwards, sort of justifying that a little bit more. Obviously, Fnatic already were there at that echelon since maybe like winning the Eliza Espo event and obviously performing pretty well to get to top 8 at the major. So yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that I think we can use as takeaways for these org sides. But at the very least, Scriv mentioned he wanted this to be a positive point. I think Complexity, with Grim looking pretty nice, with Floppy, he's had some really nice entries. And I don't know about his performance. Otherwise, I think his stats will probably tell a little bit of a lie there, where if you just take the stats at face value, you might think he's underperforming. And maybe he is, but at least as far as I've seen, he's passed the eye test on the entry side, on T side. So that is pretty promising. And if we can just keep getting those opening kills, we can get Grim into those late round situations where he can really excel as a multi-fragger, then I think, obviously, and Halzerk still does well with the op. The other two pieces don't matter as much, right? They can do calling and supportive plays, and you don't really worry too much about it. Although it is a little bit weird to see Fang sidelined like this. I would have expected him to be a little bit more of a pop-off player, because that's sort of what he was at the Extra Salt days way back in, like, I guess now 2 years ago. But definitely, positive trends, and we'll see how many wins they can score in this I don't necessarily predict them to get out, but obviously that's a privilege reserved for a select few. And I think those select few are already selected at this point when we look at the opening rounds and also just the pedigree of the teams that are ahead of them. So yeah, nice that they made it. And maybe now they're in the permitted shoes of happy to be here.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, right? I think it's always interested me about Complexity, the way that the directive, not only in terms of NA, but I think in terms of, this constant improvement, right? Because they stuck with the Juggernaut type thing for a while and it really didn't work, and they got kind of unlucky, players having to move in, the oboe move away, all that you can call it unlucky in a sense, right? And I think that with this roster, they have very quickly been more like adapt or die. They maybe kept Junior for an event or two too long, but it wasn't really all that egregious, I don't think.
Not as egregious as when Junior was on Fury, I'll tell you that much.
For sure. They figured out a way to get back in. And I think as well, just in the way that the team is playing, the team is functioning, right? There was a lot of fingers being pointed at then JT pretty quickly that, whether he should stick in because his numbers weren't as hot. And again, very quickly, they seem to have worked around and adapted that. At one point, Floppy was seen as more of a star player on the teams that he was in. And again, maybe casting it back a little further to the Extra Salt days. And they have changed and, molded themselves quite a bit this past 6 months, I feel like. And we're seeing a slow ramp up, a slow change, and big improvements for Complexity, which is always good.
Yeah, you know what?
I think
before we segue, I just have to point out, some people will say, wait, Pernigo, you seem oddly positive about Complexity, but you were just shitting on Liquid. The thing is, again, it's like that org expectation thing. Like, Liquid are supposed to be contending for best team in the world. And that is laughable to most people if you actually said that that's what they were trying to do. Alige had an interview on HLTV where he said, our goal is to win a major. I don't think they're even close to doing that with this lineup. I don't know if lineup changes or just strategic changes are going to be required. I don't think Nitro can win a major at this point in his career, maybe as a coach or something, but I don't know if he's really cut out for that anyway, because I'm not sure how strategically minded he is versus how much of a leader of man he is, and that seems to be he falls into the latter category. Meanwhile, if you look at Complexity, again, they're not necessarily spending as much money and investing as much as you would think, certainly not as much as Liquid. I'm not really sure who even wins in a domestic head-to-head at this point, which normally I would always call for Liquid. But obviously in the last couple of times these teams met, it was a little bit on the closer side, at least some of the time for Complexity. And I think with this run of form they've shown recently, they could actually contend with Liquid, although I doubt we'll actually see this. The other thing I'll say, and this will be our segue, I think, unless Scriv has too much of an issue with it, is their Complexity, that is, playing against Heroic in their opening matchup. What the fuck is this Heroic logo? Thoughts, gentlemen? What is happening with this logo?
They redesigned it right on Twitter. I think that does segue us quite well. We can talk, because if we stay on the play-ins there, we'll just be talking about teams that have made it. So we'll set things up. But honestly, yeah, I don't know. It just kind of looks like the old one, but a bit more blocky.
A bit chunky.
Yeah. Maybe it looks a little bit better in higher resolution, but like I'm looking at it in this HLTV page, and I'm like, what?
I remember seeing it on Twitter and it looked decent, to say the least. I think that,
I didn't hate it when it was on Twitter, but now I'm looking at it on HLTV and it's giving me all the wrong vibes, man. All the wrong vibes.
There's just a few too many dark edges or whatever going around, so it doesn't fit very well on HLTV. What do you think?
It just looks compressed. Like it
Sure.
looks like took the old Heroic logo that was like this, and you just decided to squish it a little bit.
Exactly.
So it's more, I guess, so it looks more like a badge. I imagine designing around like a rectangle is much more difficult than something that's a bit more square shaped. So that might be part of it. Something to do with branding. It probably this will look better on a jersey, I think.
Yeah, printing on shirts is pretty important as well. Some logos are hard to, like you say, kind of cut around and get on shirts and stuff.
It's like Complexity with their old logo.
They
used to just have like Complexity in the middle of their logo, but on their shirts they would just have like the circle. Yeah, because it looked better.
Right.
I think predominantly because it looked better. It's like, what the Complexity logo. It's like that circle thing, and then we'll just put Complexity somewhere else on the shirt instead. It's fine. You get it.
I am still waiting for teams to start putting the names of the players like on the front, like maybe above the breast or something. You know what I mean? Like that, you don't look at their backs most of the time. I guess now TOs are starting to do it now with like the back camera, right? But for the most part, like for all the time, we're seeing them head on. It's just like, oh, sports, LOL. And it's like, bro, like design the jerseys for what we're actually going to see, as viewers.
That's kind of true, actually.
I don't know why
that's
they're
kind of true. On the sleeves, maybe?
Yeah, like, something like that. Even on the shoulder, right?
It's readable.
The sleeve is cool.
Yeah.
you know, the bit that does the right hand. You know, I guess some of them are left-handed, to be fair.
Make them get tattoos of their alias on their arms, you know, of course. It's in the contract.
Yeah. Yeah, you pull up like Config's arm and he's like, let me show you how I got my nice new sleeve. It's heroic, phase. I had to cross that one out. NIP. Yeah. Classic.
Yeah, just the same cover up time and time again. But yeah, let's move on. Let's talk about a little bit of setup. Maybe just a quick 15 minutes here because I got a few topics that I want to go over. And it is ongoing, as it were. So I think that we don't want to do too much setup because next episode we'll probably come back and talk about how it all went down in the upcoming week. Yeah, I guess we can very briefly just touch on. I'll add this in here, and we'll start with these teams. I think Na'Vi, G2, FaZe, all in the same group. All three of them coming straight out of the gate, looking really solid. FaZe, sort of as we were talking, won their matchup against Spirit. All in 2-0s, all looking really good, all kind of dominant as well. So really impressive stuff from the three of them, and I think that they have to be now with G2. You know, finding form behind Nico, an awful lot of it, right, it is down to him. I think that these three teams have got to be the three favorites coming into the tournament. Yeah, even over an Outsiders, even over a Heroic, despite what HLTV rankings and the major and all that kind of stuff might say. I think that those three teams have got to be the favorites for me. Are you guys in agreement, or is there anything controversial about Na'Vi, G2, FaZe for the run to the top?
Navi's a little bit hard for me to put much stock in. I know they did destroy Cloud9 a little bit, right? But I don't know. I mean, you can't discount a team that has Simple on it. Like, you can't count them out entirely, but they have been questionable, as YouM3 was saying. They have been rocky. So I guess if I had to rank order, it would probably be like FaZe, G2, and those two are very close, by the way. It could either swap either way. We'll obviously see this head-to-head tomorrow, so looking forward to that. And then followed by... or maybe it's not tomorrow. Whenever we see it, we'll see it soon. And followed by, obviously, Na'Vi, I think, is like the clear third team. But I feel like they're a third team that is like, people are just going to prey on their downfall in this particular event. It seemed like they've secured a good initial berth for them because their upper semifinal match is going to be played against the winner of Liquid and IHC, and that's likely to go the way of Na'Vi pretty clearly. Although, I mean, Complexity isn't even in this group, but I did want to shout out, they almost beat Na'Vi, actually. It's pretty surprising. That's one of the reasons why this particular lineup of Na'Vi has looked a little bit questionable to me, is that they had a very shaky wins as opposed to convincing ones, but they obviously look better today. Maybe they're warmed up now. Maybe it was real, what Simple was saying, or they were using Blast as a warm-up event, and they're actually all fine, and there's no dramas. We're going to find out very soon, and yeah, but I would still put them third below G2 and FaZe, especially on, in terms of like how well these rosters have been doing recently.
I would actually even put them below Heroic.
Fair.
I think G2, FaZe, Heroic are probably my three favorites because I'm kind of in agreement. I don't think Na'Vi have really shown enough with what this roster has to offer. Like, they probably were the second best team in the world in terms of consistency throughout events last year with some Die Young. And now that they're having to bring somebody else in and bring him up to speed, it does... I almost get the impression that we might see Na'Vi be a probable contender at like a Cologne or... maybe ESL Pro League even, something a little bit further in the calendar. But these first couple of events, I'm not expecting too much from Na'Vi. Let's not forget that their first game was against a Cloud9 that have undergone a change that is pretty significant for this roster. They were with that 5 for such a long time that even understanding the intricacies of what's happening in the Na'Vi game, where it's you play each other enough over the years, there's going to be almost an internal meta that builds up between these two teams on the maps that you frequent. Buster is never going to be able to learn what's gone on in those games just by watching demos or just by seeing a sheet of paper that says if they do this, they're probably going to try and do this because previous games, you have to infer a lot of that data and process it yourself from your own experiences. So even this win against Cloud9, I'm not putting too much stock in it. I actually think Na'Vi in some respects have an easier side of the bracket than the other contenders in this group. I think they're sort of destined for a lower finals, go through to the playoffs, if anything.
Do you think actually they could go to the lower finals and then lose it? Because I feel like they'll go to the upper final most likely, but they'll probably lose that, which means they'll drop down to the lower final, which they could also lose, right? Like, depending on who loses between G2 and FaZe, probably destined to make the lower final themselves. Like, I don't know, man. That looks to me like, okay, we're actually going to see some pretty spicy matchups. And if I'm not wrong, it's only 2 teams advancing. So from each group, that is. Is that correct? Or is there actually a third team? Anybody
I
know?
believe you're correct.
Okay. If I am correct, and I always act like
Double
I am,
Elim does get a bit weird.
yeah. Well, I guess there would be a consolidation final if there wasn't. So I'm pretty sure it's just 2 teams from either side. Yeah, it looks like so. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing all of that up is because I actually think Navi could not get out of this group, depending on how I really think G2 and FaZe are the 2 teams to make it out. It just depends on like which the order is, right? So obviously, if you are those teams, you don't want to count that as a done deal. We saw what happened to Furia against IHC. We're about to see whether or not IHC can make the same miracle happen against Liquid. Could happen. Obviously, many people would put Furia above Liquid, even in the current state, despite Furia's downward trend. So if that is indeed the case, maybe IHC has what it takes. Although that might have been a stylistic matchup. But anyway, enough predictions. I think Navi are very precarious. They may not actually make it to playoffs. I would actually say it's more likely that they don't.
Yeah, okay, all right. So listen, I think they have an easier side of the bracket. I think that going into a G2 or FaZe, I still think that is a matchup that for Navi, with the way that they, again, only in one series, so maybe I am applying a lot of recency bias here, and it's the Cloud9, as you know, Michael's just said. But I do think that they put on an absolute clinic. They really did look good, and you know they're always a big game team. Not quite so much as FaZe, but Navi have always felt like they, because of their individuals, right, are able to just pull out the stops and really turn the heat up, turn it up to a level, whatever you want to say, right. So I do feel like moving forwards, I think that it will be tough, but I do think that there is a good chance. If they play against a G2, let's say, in the lower final, that would probably be the most sort of logical way that it would go if everything made sense. I think that they could beat G2, not handily, but I think that, again, that is a matchup that usually tends to favor Navi. So
yeah,
there's my reasoning, there's my thinking.
Sorry, I know we skipped past the play-ins, but can I just say, anybody that thought EG were going to make it into the group stage, you're silly, unlucky.
Listen, it's even worse now because obviously EG lost to Illuminar 2-0 in CCT. Anyway, really? I think the last part.
I was like, it's kind of easy. Well,
no. I had to add that last little bit just to remind people. So yeah, I mean. Well, I think you can only really laugh and move on at this point.
Yeah.
I just want more tweets. I just want more tweets.
Yeah, right.
We can have all the losses from EG, but we need more tweets from that person whose name I forget, who constantly talks about how, hey, the casters are biased, and even though they were talking about analysts because they didn't know the difference, I guess, and hey, this would never fly in real sports, even though that just means they never watch real sports. And then, I just need more of that, and also more, more like shocking upset in a tournament that maybe doesn't matter much, only for them to get completely clapped backwards. That'd be great.
It's just hilarious because they beat the #1 team in the world. Give them credit. Okay, good job, EG. You did it.
Yeah.
And then loss. And now they also have lost to the number 54th team in the world. If we're going to go by HLTV rankings. So
which they were quick to use. Remember, Yumi, they were saying we shot up from 267th or whatever the fuck number it was. Like, okay, well, how's that 54th taste?
And this is the thing. Like, I think the biggest criticism was that this came from like a performance coach person that probably doesn't know much about Counter-Strike. Is probably in charge of multiple divisions.
More in line with the League of Legends stuff for people who don't know.
How do you not trust the analysts of the game that they dedicate their lives to tell you whether this was an overperformance or an underperformance from the respective teams? The fact that you have the goal to think that you know more just because your team did well, like, again, it feels like they're trying to validate their position. Like, my team, great job, but this was actually my victory. I did this.
Listen, not only did you... Okay, I know I said some World War II stuff, so let's have some World War III stuff instead. All right. The pipeline that EG have tried to say is so epic. Well, it was just destroyed, and this time not by North American people, okay? Motherfucker. World War III's facts for you. Nobody's even going to get that one, but whatever.
Yeah, well.
All right, back to the regular stuff.
Yes.
There's always got to be some EG hate somewhere, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, how else are we going to get Kassad back on this broadcast?
Right. That's true. That is true.
He almost got cancelled for a bit. People were. I can't believe people thought that bit was real.
I was convinced all of those people were fake. I thought they were all.
I don't know.
They were like joking to be like.
I thought it was kind of obvious enough.
It's very rare you go to Reddit to go for the level-headed takes. Everyone's like, "Oh, this was a great bit, funny. We get it. You know, they're talking about the whole thing." People on Twitter and Twitch chat like, "Why is Kassad back on the desk? I thought he got through. Why is he back on the God?"
There was the one good ESL tweet was when they said like, unfortunately, Kassad's behavior was out of line for what we stand for. We will be working with him again. And the reason why that was so funny to me is not only did they have the "we will be," but like out of line for what we stand for, inadvertently just owned themselves. Unfortunately, the Saudi Arabian government is not in line with what we stand for. We will be working with them again in the future. Yeah, dickhead. There you go. Got my Richard Lewison.
Indeed. All right, so moving on then, we talk about the Group A there, I guess, is basically covered by those teams. You've got Cloud9, but again, as Michael mentioned, it's new look Cloud9, not expecting too much out from them, and no one feels sure about the Buster move. Is it going to improve them? Is it going to worsen them, if anything?
Probably the latter.
It's a team that's not made a move for a long, long time, and even before that, the four that were in the team, it was Super that got removed, wasn't it, for Hobbit? The four that were in the team have been together for, God, it's got to be like 3.5 easily, nearly 4 years, I would say. Maybe a bit longer than that, obviously, Gambit Youngster days and all that good stuff. So yeah, let's move on, talk about Group B a little bit. This one will be a bit easier to talk about as well, because we've not really seen any of the games out of it. Vitality takedown NIP 2-0 on the opening day, but beyond that, there's a lot of scope. This is the major finalists group as well. Heroic, obviously, and Outsiders, who major winners. We have to call them now.
As if that's the reality we live. I just like that script is like, we have to call these motherfuckers who ruin the game's meta.
I'd just like the record to show. Didn't mean it like that.
No, okay. Well, listen. I think it's
I'm
great.
Call them that, but I'm not pleased about it.
Yeah. And I think it's true. I mean, honestly, I was watching a game, and then like NIP had to save 2 T rounds in a row against Vitality. One of which was hilarious because, I guess this wasn't in a row. I think they saved 3 rounds. One of them was because they mollied their own bomb instead of recovering it, which was just hats off, lads. And then the other was just they stalled out. And it's like, yeah, I think I'll just go ahead and tab off. I think I'm going to go ahead and take a shower or something instead of watch this game, because like, why at this point are we saving so much? Just a little bit of meta commentary.
Shit. Well, we can maybe get into that a little bit. I've got something that would be nice to talk about in a few minutes. Okay. But with Group B here, I don't know if you guys have got anything to add. Maybe how you expect it to go. I think this is a much clearer cut kind of group. Vitality, Heroic, and I guess you could say Outsiders. Fnatic are pretty confident in themselves, right? I think actually I did have a little double check. I think it was Mezzy that said we can beat any team.
Oh, okay,
we proved it at the major is the tagline on the front page of HLTV. Yeah, there's maybe a few question marks in terms of what to expect, especially out of Outsiders, because they kind of flopped a little bit at Abu Dhabi. But other than that, I think this is a pretty clear-cut group, and there's a couple teams in here that might sneak through. There's no clear, solid favorite, no clear, solid underdog. Is that?
No, actually, I think Outsiders is last place. Just saying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I actually think outside of maybe Vitality and Heroic, I find it hard to put much stock in any of these teams.
Yeah, right.
Like it just kind of depends which version of these teams we get on the server. Like if OG have a great Dexter and a Flames and a Neofrag kind of pop it off, I think they could beat a Mouse, even a Heroic on a good day. And it's weird because I actually think Outsiders are going to improve with Chiron, but it'll probably be maybe a couple of events, kind of like a Cloud9 or a Navi where we look at them as contenders in future events as opposed to now. But I don't know. Maybe they hit the ground running. Maybe Fnatic don't really find their groove in this group. I find it very very difficult to make arguments because there's a lot of uncertainty about where these rosters stand in terms of matchups to each other. You know, we haven't had enough sample size, I think, to have a real reflection of where these teams stand.
Yeah, the other thing too to remember is that like Fnatic actually do, I think, get a little bit countered by the Outsiders play style. So when I said last place, I just looked at their opening matchup. It is against Fnatic. Probably not last place then. Probably by virtue of that matchup, I think they'll ease past Fnatic. But I really don't think that they can hold a candle to these other teams at this point. They're still betting in a new player, obviously, and they might be the most anti-stratted team at this point in World Counter-Strike, just because, like, I don't think any team wants to be embarrassed by losing to them anymore. They were all tired of the strats. They're all tired of the saves and the constant sort of like weird plays and Jame having an op every round somehow. I think they're all going to be pretty much on the ball in that respect. I just think the Fnatic in particular have a little bit of a rough head-to-head matchup. Like Nikadoz versus Jame is obviously James favored, and maybe it depends a little bit on the maps, but I think if you give them any wiggle room, Outsiders are just going to somehow not lose the match. You know, it's not so much that they win; they just somehow don't lose, and I can't explain it. But I think all these teams will be able to. So that's the price you pay for winning a major is you never win anything ever again. So maybe that'll happen.
Yeah.
Cool.
Just a small tag along to that is that Outsiders at Rio probably weren't heavily invested in terms of like what you're supposed to do if they save and how you counter it, because teams have tried that in the past when it comes to them in their bracket, and I don't think it's really actually helped them. But this is actually a weird time when Outsiders are transitioning to actually implementing more fast-paced play and actually being more aggressive and not just bleeding out the round completely dry. And I actually think that's easier for teams to read into to a certain degree if they're going to start activating this as another weapon within the arsenal. You know, it took like several years for Jame to build up to this moment. It's like, I've conditioned you for these past couple. Now is our time. We're going to start playing like everybody else.
Yes, yeah.
But in a certain way, that's actually easier to play against because while you might get caught out a couple of times by it, you're also going to be more prepped for those hits. Like people are getting very, very not greedy with their utility, but I guess disciplined about, you know, using it into later rounds because Outsiders played slow. So that's how you're supposed to play against them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I think that kind of does it, to be fair. The Group B side of things, unfortunately, I guess the way that it works out, it's a little hard to shadow box teams against each other and all that sort of stuff, but it'll at the very least make for a very interesting group, and we'll maybe see how things pan out, you know, NIP, a few flashes in that pan, and obviously working with a new name, but an old name at the same time. So I'm interested for sure to see how config plays out.
Oh, by the way, it can't be two teams advancing because there's a quarterfinal, semifinal, and grand final in the single elimination playoff bracket. So there is a third team somehow that advances. So we've just gotten this format completely fucking wrong. So I don't know who that changes the game a little bit. Then it must, because
I guess if you make it to the lower final, you must.
Yeah, and then you're just playing for.
You must qualify, and then you're playing for seeding. Yeah,
for seeding, I guess. I guess that must mean okay. In that case, I suppose Navi probably does squeak through. And then the only question is, if we have Heroic and Vitality making it in easily to the playoffs, who would be the third team in Group B? Our parting shot. Yeah, that's really hard. That's what going back to what YouM3 said.
Well,
I think it's probably either OG or Mouse. That's my guess, because I don't think the other teams have like proven enough. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I don't know. That's my prediction. Is the winner of OG Mouse will be the third team out of Group B, which is probably a bit weird, but whatever. Dispense with those matches very quickly, and we'll get on to the real Counter-Strike, I think. That's my guess.
Yeah. I'm just trying to have a quick look on Wikipedia, but you must be right that it's got to be 3 teams that go through.
Yeah, I think
Wikipedia
upper final.
Sometimes.
I think upper final, if you make it there, you're in first, second, right? That's how I would.
Oh, so the lower final is consolidation, and the upper final, either one of those two spots gives you that's fine. I guess the only bad thing about that is that Navi probably gets second seed because they'll get to the upper final and then lose to the whoever is actually getting first seed out of that group, which means one of G2 or FaZe will be third seed. But that just means we'll eventually get them in the head-to-head. Presumably they'll defeat whoever is the third seed from the other group, right? So.
Yeah. So from what I can tell, it is first and second out of upper bracket gets qualified, and then lower bracket is a consolidation. So.
Yeah, a little wacky, but gives us more Counter-Strike, I think, to work with. So it's one of them. I think that we're definitely seeing over the past few events, ESL especially, are playing around with their format to see what works and keep things fresh, and maybe just playing around with the format for that reason. To be fair,
also punishing the lower bracket side of things, which going to the lower bracket, you should be punished.
Yes.
You used one of your lives.
Mm. All right, cool. So moving forward, there's a couple things on the docket sort of for the last half an hour here that I thought would be interesting to talk about. One of them being, and what I always love talking about is the fact that ESL have ended their exclusivity with Twitch. They've had exclusivity in the past that didn't really work out. Facebook in 2018, and then YouTube for a little bit into 2019, I believe. The Facebook one was kind of dreadful and an era that we hope to forget, to say the least. But I think that this one could be pretty lucrative. I think the popularity of YouTube has really stepped up. I was watching on YouTube earlier. It was about 26,000 there, maybe about 70 or 80 or so on Twitch. So that's a pretty big number that maybe we've been missing out on just because some people don't use Twitch, or the way I think that you would get the notification and all that kind of stuff on YouTube is a little more active, where on Twitch you have to go looking for it, right? Unless you really do have notifications turned on Twitch, but on YouTube they're sort of forced upon you, or it'll easily come up on your recommended if you are an avid CS watcher. So I kind of like the look of this. I think that we also had, PGL ran majors in 4K. That was kind of their big thing, that it was the first major in 4K, I think for Stockholm it must have been. And, that's kind of cool. I, on the UK internet, can't stream it in 4K, but for those of you out there that can enjoy 4K, I'm sure it's brilliant. But I don't know. I feel like widening the breadth is just going to give us a bit more space to perhaps play them off against each other, or perhaps indeed just the fact that streaming rights are not as important, not as paramount to the survival of the esport as perhaps it is in normal sports, right? Because people watch live, they watch free, they watch in their own time. It's a lot harder to get people all in one place and paying for the privilege to watch the games.
I think it's also important for people to note that it's not like this model always works in terms of expansion of viewership and having more options. We just seen the stats for, I think, the Blast Spring groups are actually lower than the previous year, even though Blast have been one of the the tournament organizer that have been the proponents of having multiple streams and being on YouTube and Twitch simultaneously. So just because you have that doesn't mean that viewership is suddenly going to expand, but it's also like, this makes sense from a business angle as well for ESL, who run many tournaments within their circuit in terms of different games, different they provide different streams and have sometimes multiple streams running simultaneously, that if you're going to approach these broadcast rights deals, actually having viewership numbers on different platforms and being able to leverage that, like, oh, when we stream on your platform, we pull in this amount of viewers. Do you want to retain that? These are good leverage arguments, and these are good stats arguments to have when you're negotiating for these broadcast rights in the future. So we could end up back in a situation where, maybe even ESL is exclusive on YouTube or exclusive on Twitch, but there is also another angle where, even though it's free and an open market for them for maybe a season or two, these are numbers that they can then take to one of these platforms and then maybe go, oh, this is maybe the sort of value that we can provide to your platform if you want to be more esports focused, because they actually command a pretty heavy presence in terms of the esports circuit as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, the other point to make too is that I think just in terms of a tech side, which might be overlooked for a lot of people, especially if it doesn't apply to them. If you're somebody who prefers to watch on your phone, or that's like the main way that you look at stuff, YouTube is infinitely better on mobile than Twitch is. It's just a matter of fact, at least on Android for me. I'm on a pretty recent phone, and Twitch just is super buggy, where like if you try to close the player, it'll play in the background, and then you have to reopen the app and then close it again. That just puts me off from even bothering. A lot of the times there's like more buffering, there's obviously more ads. If you already pay for YouTube Premium, like some guy in the chat just said earlier, then you don't have to worry about that at all. Or if you just have a common sense ad block on your phone, then you're probably pretty good because it actually works on YouTube, unlike on Twitch. So there's lots of reasons why a lot of people will be switching over. And I do think that it is the onset for, we saw this Blast TV major that's coming up, or they're specifically calling it the Blast.tv major. That's because if you go to Blast.tv, you can watch their matches with their own thing. That's pretty obviously a precursor to there being some sort of paid service that you can subscribe to and then get CS in that sense. And I think probably ESL are realizing that, or they noticed or whatever, that, Blast is doing that. I'm sure this deal was in the works beforehand anyway. Maybe they were just waiting for a contract to run out with Twitch or something. I'm not sure how that business deal worked behind the scenes. I actually imagine there was no contract now that I'm thinking about it, because why would there be? Like, would people really be paying for broadcasting rights for ESL specifically? They could, but I don't know that was happening. So yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of like, this makes sense, gets more viewers, gets more tech out there, more options. And obviously, if you can decide, hey, I want to do, the stream in 4K. I don't think YouTube actually has the back end for this yet, but I'm pretty sure eventually 4K is actually going to become a YouTube Premium specific feature. And if you pay for YouTube Premium and watch a video, you obviously are giving some of your subscription, as far as I understand, it's like the old YouTube Red, goes to the creators of the channel, assuming they have monetization enabled. So that is actually how they'll have some sort of money, even if ad block or whatever is enabled, just based on that. So if you pay to watch 4K videos and 4K streams, you're automatically supporting the people that, whose videos and streams you're watching. So maybe that's something down the line. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they were doing it. Either way, I mean, it's obviously true that, people who are viewing esports don't really pay much money at all back into it. Very few people, I imagine, subscribe to these Twitch channels for these tournament organizers, if they even have the subs enabled. So yeah, I mean, based on that alone, it's like probably, yeah, let me just let me donate to a streamer instead of a TO. That's a pretty common thing. I mean, maybe that's just how it should be anyway, but like I think the pay-per-view thing is something that's just been a bugbear for esports for a long time. If we can get like pay to view in higher quality, that's probably a little bit more palatable to the average person, especially if it's like, I don't think ESL is streaming in 4K right now anyway. So especially if that is the case, then they can introduce this as a new feature on top of what they already have, and that will probably be easier to sell to people instead of it feeling like something was taken away from them, even though it was just being offered for free anyway. So yeah, I've been enjoying watching it on YouTube. I also woke up at 5 a.m. today. I saw there was Katowice games on, so don't know what the fuck that's about. The schedule is pretty amazing. So I love that. I already missed some action, and then went back to bed. So there you go.
Also, they could maybe even do like long-term partnerships with, if they have their own commodity platform, like getting, I don't know, Skybox involved, and maybe making that part of a premium feature where you can almost like pause and play rounds as they're uploaded to Skybox. And there could be ways that you can market a more like analytical look at broadcasts, because just looking at it from the observer's POV, or like what the broadcast is offering, you don't actually get the most out of it all the time. Like if you're actually wanting to break down how something actually happened, you want to like replay and look at different perspectives, or just get a proper overview. The minimap, you can only look at like 1/4 or 1/5 of your screen at maximum. So small things like that can certainly be tacked on if you're trying to go for like a sort of pay-per-view or more premium experience. Give the viewer more options.
Yeah, I think all in all, for me, it's got to be a good move. Opens up the field a little bit more, and I will say, yeah, YouTube is starting to compete pretty heavily. I have YouTube Premium, and I think it's sound. So I'll probably do a lot of my viewing now on YouTube rather than on Twitch, to be fair, which, even Twitch on PC gets a bit cluttered sometimes, and trying to catch just little things, man. You can pause the player on YouTube, and there is an option to jump back to the live, real-time gameplay, as it were, whereas on Twitch, it's like, if you need to miss the action for any reason, it's a bit harder to go back and catch what you've missed. You have to go into the videos, you have to, then start and find the time that you were at and things like that. So if you've got something to do, and for us, that's kind of a big deal, because we got a lot of games to catch, a lot of Counter-Strike to watch.
If we're going to list petty grievances, every time an ad is loaded, your Twitch stream buffers, and you have no way of actually properly resetting and getting it up to track, so you have to then close it and then reopen it, and then you're probably going to get hit with another ad, if anything. YouTube, you can accelerate, like you said. If you miss something, you can actually just 2x speed through the rounds if you really want to try and catch up and get back to the live broadcast. Twitch also has an issue where if you have too many streams running simultaneously with hardware acceleration, the streams will crash, or streams crash very frequently. It's just like all these small things that are just silly to have on a platform that is so dependent on live uplink. You know, why are my streams crashing? Why am I getting hit with so many ads? And why can I not also make sure that I am on live? It's just that still defeats the whole purpose of a live broadcast platform.
I think back to, like, obviously one of the things that it's a reduction to some degree of what the complaints actually were. But when people were talking about moving to Facebook or to YouTube way back, a lot of the community was like, "But my PogChamp." Well, listen, motherfuckers, they took your PogChamp, okay? That January 6th happened, and they took your fucking PogChamp, buddy. You don't have PogChamp anymore. You got a lizard. The lizard people are taking over, and you're fine with it. No, move to YouTube. Defeat the lizard folk.
we like YouTube as well, don't we? Because whenever we do like the odd watch party type thing, you can quite easily get that rocking on YouTube. Yeah. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there. The Twitch dominance, who knows, man? It might be on the way out, and maybe they've seen all the creators complaining the split is going down, and all this kind of stuff. They're taking more money because Twitch is really expensive, even with Amazon behind it. So maybe ESL knows something a little more than we do.
Just because you do it first doesn't mean you do it right first. Sometimes the secondary guide improves on your platform, and YouTube are kind of in that direction. Like, they've got the infrastructure to make it work. Twitch just need to get with the times. Like, they need to pull into the demands of their audience. Hell, even YouTube making short form content video things. Twitch tried to make videos live on their platform and have like a thing where creators could share with their audience. Why is there nothing like that? Small promo clips or small promo videos. Why is that not a thing that you can even do on your own platform? Twitch actually were sort of symbiotic to YouTube, and they were fine with being symbiotic. They actually need to compete because YouTube's impeding their market.
Yeah. No, big time. I mean, the other thing too is that I've even seen lately on the subreddit, and this is a very specific, like, niche, super small scale thing, but it's funny that I noticed all of the clips, or pretty much all of the clips from the ESL event, were in YouTube. Like, I don't know if that's just because there's like a few dedicated clippers who are using YouTube, but for a while, obviously YouTube Clips was pretty bad. It wasn't very functional, and now it seems like you can make it a little bit easier. So yeah, who knows? I mean, they're even infringing on that, and YouTube Clips was like a legit thing Twitch Clips rather was a legit thing that was allowing people to, like, advertise like big moments or immortalize them or whatever. If they're going to be on YouTube, by the way, it's even more convenient on YouTube. On Twitch, when you watch a clip, you have to then go back to, like, you have to click another link to watch that and like load a stream and stuff. On YouTube, it's literally the whole VOD. You just have an isolated segment, and then I think it automatically starts playing the rest of the VOD afterwards too. So if you just like click on a clip, there's at least probably like a 10 to 15% chance for like the conversion rate where people are just like, oh, I'll just keep watching or whatever, for at least for a little bit, right?
The fact that Clips is on a different landing platform, like it's Clips.twitch instead of,
it's
its own website. Clip generation also takes an age if you're watching anything mildly popular. Like, they just need to improve their infrastructure. They need to somehow get up to speed with what YouTube are offering, because I have no issue with either platform. Like, if a stream is one place and I want to watch it, I'll watch it.
Sure, yeah.
But it's just like when you compare the features that the YouTube are offering, like it's in parity with Twitch, if not better.
And we are saying all of this while live on Twitch, so
indeed. Yes, indeed.
So, sorry.
But the video goes out on YouTube, so we're not biased one way or the other, right? An audio on Anchor.
There you go. I will watch games of CS:GO on Spotify before the end of the year. Check it out.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they're doing video now as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I think that kind of fills that one in. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, maybe a little bit more of a broader conversation here for, 15, 20 minutes. If we want to get into it, we'll see where it goes. There was a nice article put up on HLTV that the M4s are actually nearing parity. I think a lot of people jumped on the A4 going into the end of last year. Coming into this year, it feels like, the A1S still has a place. Now, they are facts. We can't really refute the facts, where I think that the A4 is still a little bit higher, but it is down. I wanted to have a conversation here, fellas, about gun balance. We have it every now and then, but more specifically on the idea of, should we have the weapons fully balanced like this? Should we, be able to pull out the M4, A4, and the A1S depending on what spots you play? Should we have one gun that dominates? Should the T side have, a couple guns that they can choose from? Get the Krieg is sort of the only option over there, but does that have a place somewhere, or should it have a place somewhere is more the question. So I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit of game balance, and I know that Prinogo will be sort of chomping at the bit to maybe chat about this one and how it should or should not work.
I think the biggest issue with the A1S dominant meta in the last, like the dying embers of 2022 is mostly because of the fact that smokes are, first of all, you can drop nades now. And I am very vocal about how I feel like this has ruined Inferno in particular. It was a pretty oppressive for Dust 2 as well, but that was a little bit attenuated by the fact that Dust 2 is a bit more T-sided by design, so it wasn't as bad. But on Inferno, like Banana is just this no man's land. You don't ever really want to go there, but you have to because you need map control. You want to jockey for position as a T, obviously, and then the CTs can just sort of like, depending on how good their protocols are, they can completely tear open that area and or isolate it or whatever. Smoke spams, no tracers, etc. That was really one of the worst like actual gunfight metas that we've seen in Counter-Strike for a long time. I actually would put it comparable to like the Krieg and the AUG, even though like it wasn't as ridiculous in terms of the amount of value that you were getting for those guns. When they were meta, at least you were actually looking at your opponents most of the time. And with the A1S, you were, you know, it doesn't have great penetration, but you're still able to wall bang. Obviously, you can smoke spam with impunity, and like players just have to sort of try to imagine where you might be on the other side. Players are really good at doing all sorts of really crazy things that you would never expect, and still they were not really able to keep up with that. Like that's just a step too far. You don't even give them any opportunity for counterplay, which I think should be there, right? And so there's a lot of conversation about how to fix it, but I do think that like making it so that it's actually a choice between the A4 and the A1S is a better option. I think probably it was a little bit weird that they went for the damage buff to begin with the A1S. If you wanted to make it a little bit more like of a viable option, you wouldn't necessarily need to buff the damage as much as maybe like target the fire rate or target the you know, something to the effect of like maybe the ammo capacity again. I don't know exactly what they were thinking when they decided to go for the damage buff, but it seems to have had the intended effect at the very least. It's just, I still feel like smoke spams are a little bit too powerful insofar as they just don't really have that much counterplay. And so maybe tracers just should be added to silenced weapons instead of them being sort of like exempt from that ruling. It's kind of a neat little strategic touch, but you could, I guess you could at least make them more rare if you wanted to do that instead of it being, oh, they just completely exist outside of that rule. Either way, I do think it's nice to see A4s again. It's probably not that terrible for there to be smoke spams every now and then. I just feel like it's such a not exciting way to play the game. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit weird to see the op also be relegated to a bit more of like a tentative, precarious play, because obviously it has only the 5 shots now, which is another contributing factor, I think, to like CT holds being a little bit less solid in this current meta. But that's more down to also like flashes and playing, you know, anti-strat sort of thing, or expecting where your opponents are going to be. So I think there's a lot of potential value in rolling with this meta for a little bit and seeing where it goes. I do think there's value in having a choice between the two guns. Obviously, the main reason why we can't have both of the guns in the buy menu is because like the auto sniper takes up the last slot, and I'm sure it's very hard coded in their code base. So for people who don't know, it's actually really difficult to add like another slot into the inventory. It would be a ridiculous amount of work. And so like even if they didn't want to make it so that you can't, like, you have to equip one or the other the same way that you have to equip like the 5.7 or the CZ. It's like the same thing, really. It's like, yeah, you just can't do that easily. We only have one guy working on the whole game. Sorry, guys. We're a small indie company. Please buy our skins for billions of dollars every year, and we'll see where we go from there. Maybe then we can afford a second developer who might be able to reverse engineer that mess. But no, unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. That too is fan fiction. What do you think, Yumi?
So I'm gonna just tag onto your sort of grenade dropping thing. I actually hold the opinion that the only map that didn't improve to some capacity is Inferno in terms of like the grenade utility. It made play more boring.
Yes.
Every map that has sort of spawn based throwing utility has improved, I think, in terms of like the level of play and not having to worry so much about, you know, pulling rotates just to give utility or like have somebody throw the utility for you and then resetting. You know, sometimes teams would just lose rounds because they were trying to do something tricky like that, and it just actually lowered the potential level of a round sometimes, if they wanted to be extra cautious.
Yeah, I think it's an Inferno issue as opposed to a grenade dropping issue. I personally think
even
grenade,
like a skybox related issue, to be quite honest.
could
Like
also
if
be
they open
that,
up the skyboxes could actually change how that map plays.
Yeah.
But in terms of gun balancing, I think with the way that they changed the A1S, people are still going to be using it because it is cheaper. If you're going to have to go for more of a budget buy, people will go for MP9s, FAMASs, and if you have enough funds for it, you would like to be able to get some extra utility on these lower buys to help compensate for the fact that you don't have the ideal weapons. And the A1S is always going to have that ability to just be able to get you that extra flash, or you can
Yes.
squeak out a buy at like 35, 3600 or something. So having that extra flexibility will always be nice for like AWPers or in-game leaders that are, I think, a bit more money conscious than the rest of the team. But it will, I mean, we're seeing it already in current play. T-sides are going to have more success. You know, people are, I think, a little bit apprehensive of the fact that Anubis is so T-sided, but one, it's a new map. Most maps do start T-sided because CTs don't know how to react appropriately. But also the weapon changes are going to influence that. Not you know, sort of talking onto your fact that the AWP is going to be adversely affected the most on CT because of limited bullets. It's very infrequently that a T-side AWPer is spamming so consistently, and then being in a punishable enough position that actually affects his play. So, yeah, I mean, there's not a lot that I disagree with you on in terms of how the weapon's been balanced, but I do like that the weapon that can kill it in 4 bullets is also the one that is the longest visibly in terms of like, you know, the silencer, so that it's also if you even if you like half check it, it's more easily punished than if it was an A4.
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level of play, those very minor details to us, you know, matchmaking plebs, so to speak, actually matter hugely, and it will result in, I mean, we saw this when the A1S started taking off, the number of times people peeked out because they were used to the A4 not showing. Like, I'm thinking of that cubby on B site Dust 2. It's just like, yeah, let me just show my silencer waving wildly in the wind over here. Yeah, that happened all the time. And so people did need to adapt to it even at the highest level, but definitely something that you got to watch out for, and definitely means that I think with the price change in between the two of them, the price difference between the two rifles is a pretty big contributing factor as well. I'm still waiting for the FAMAS to be useful for anything. I don't even know why pros even bother with it. I know sometimes they feel like they have to hold an angle. I would unironically say pros should just buy a Deagle instead of a FAMAS at this point. If range is your issue, just buy a Deagle. Or a Scout maybe. I don't know. Something cheaper that actually gives you a fighting shot. Obviously, it won't work for every single round. But if you need something closer range, MP9 is the way to go. I don't know. I can't imagine anybody going for a FAMAS in its current state. I know people have been suggesting to buff the burst fire. That's funny to me. I think, you know, it's just not even close to being competitive with the Galil. And in the way that like the A1S and the A4 offer something different than the AK and offer something different than each other, that is a point where if we're going to talk gun balance more broadly, the FAMAS probably should see some sort of change to it to make it a little bit more useful as a discount rifle, if we even want discount rifles in the game. But of course, when I say we, I have to remember that I'm talking about Valve, who again have one person working on CSGO, probably allegedly in a video game Minecraft. So what can you say?
Also, the MP9 is just probably better for a lot of, you know, scenarios, and has a better return on investment. You know, you get
with the kill reward.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you get 1 kill. I did enough with my very cheap weapon that has paid for itself in half.
Yes.
So it's it's a little silly, isn't it?
All right, cool. I think that's going to do us then, fellas. I'm pretty happy with leaving it there. A little bit of setup for Katowice as well. If you are watching this during the tournament, maybe we get it right, maybe we get it wrong. Time will indeed tell. But once again, that is going to be it from the off angle here, folks. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll catch you again next week.
You're going to love this video right here. You're going to love it. Check it out right now.